Hello, it must be Tuesday, and it's a beautiful day here, whether it's sunny, raining, whatever is happening in your world. I hope that it's a beautiful day for you too. And I'm ever so excited today. We've got another fabulous guest for you. We've got the lovely Sandy McDonald. Hello, Sandy.
Hello, hello, Michelle. Hello, everybody.
So, Sandy is this incredible storyteller and clarity coach. She has a wealth of experience in communications and in many different areas of communications that have helped her and led her to be this incredible and insightful coach, trainer, and entrepreneur in the world of storytelling. And storytelling for a purpose. And one of those great purposes is the fabulous charity that she established a few years ago. But enough from me. Please, Sandy, tell everybody a little bit more about yourself.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. What an amazing introduction. oh, um, it's always hard to start at the beginning and find a way to navigate through the story of a life. But I was thinking about this earlier, and I thought the thing that came to mind is that, like many people who've entered into the world as an entrepreneur, and I've been in my own business for 43 years, one way or another, I have navigated a journey of creativity and necessity. And so that led me through art school. As an art school student, I dreamt of being a children's book illustrator, and I ended up being a graphic designer. And the story I tell myself is that I hated graphic design, and actually I didn't. I loved graphic design. It was problem solving and it was creative. What I hated was having to compromise what I thought worked because of what the clients felt worked. And there's a big story in that, which I won't go into at this point. But then as life traveled on, I discovered that my husband and I ran a marketing communications business for 22 years called Artwords. I was the art, he was the words. And I discovered that I actually preferred the words to the art. And so we'd been involved in a form of storytelling all along, because after all, that's what marketing communications is. You know, you have to dig very deep to get people's stories to be able to produce that brochure or that website or that corporate identity, because otherwise it just doesn't resonate and has no meaning. And so when I discovered that, slowly and by degrees, I went through a whole experience starting this charity. When I looked at how I had managed to get a worldwide community to respond to my request for them to help orphaned and vulnerable children in South Africa by knitting squares and sending the squares to my aunt so she could make blankets. A very simple idea, which worked. What I saw was that I had a purpose, a driving purpose. I wanted to help these children once I started to do the research and found out what was happening to them and the enormity of the problem. So I had a purpose, and that purpose drove clarity of storytelling. And I told the stories with that driving passion, and that's what ignited this global community and brought us together and in this united cause to do something for these children, which was to warm them with beautiful handmade blankets. And I'm really happy to say that 13 years later, the charity still goes, it runs itself. I think we now are about 2.2 million squares, and we've put about 120,000 blankets around children in South Africa, which is, remarkable from this small seed of an idea, which I germinated and watered and nourished. But this worldwide community have taken over, and they've all done it through stories. They tell the stories now, which I just think is wonderful. But at some point I had to earn a living or re-earn a living. So I went back to, well, what could I do? And realizing, unpacking what I'd done and what sat in behind the success of the storytelling, I developed a framework for, well, how can others do this? I want other people to be able to tell stories to change other people's lives. And so I needed a framework to be able to help them do that. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years, is sort of honing that training and that skill, if you like.
Wow, what a story and what a journey. And it's interesting. the theme throughout, that creativity in whatever the form it's come through in, whether it's been the graphic design or the starting a worldwide community and a worldwide movement, all the way through now to doing that storytelling framework and that creativity around what the framework would be, so that other people can also then learn how to do and have the benefit of your many years of experience and trial and error to then be able to do it themselves. What a great gift you bring to the world.
Thank you.
So it's interesting then with people like yourself that have these great gifts. What do you then think is success for you? What do you think success is defined by you?
Oh, do you know that is, it's such a difficult question, well, for me, because I think I really believe that my success, if I have success, is in the quality of my relationships. And I'd start with my own family. I think probably I would, I'd have to say that my greatest success is having two healthy daughters who love each other and who I love and they love me and my husband, and we have maintained a really healthy relationship. And I feel like that's part nature, but I think there's also a lot of nurture in that. And again, story sits in this because we're all storytellers, the four of us. That's just the way we roll. And I think what we're doing with our stories is that we are embedding this sense that we belong to each other, that we care about each other, that we've got each other's backs. And so that to me is a measure of success. And I suppose that carries through into the other relationships that I hold dear and the relationships that I have with my clients, that if they leave me feeling warmly towards me, then to me I've achieved some success. If they go on to take the storytelling and my purpose is to enrich, transform and save lives. And I don't do that myself. I do it because I help people to tell the stories that will enrich, transform and save lives. And if they do that, even if it's one life, then I guess that's a wonderful measure of success, really.
What a wonderful archway, again, from your own more closer, delicate and intimate relationships with your family, all the way through to your clients and your wider community. But that beautiful thread that you're able to share, that success is around the quality of that communication through stories and leaving people feeling that they are enriched and able to transform lives. Again, what incredible gems you're sharing with the amazing audience today. And
Thank you.
And I'm sure that they're all so, enthralled with what you do, that they'd like to know more of how they could do it themselves. And that's where the 3 tips comes in. What would you say to people watching that might go, well, I keep telling myself stories, but in my stories, I never seem to get anywhere and I never seem to win. And, people keep telling me to look on the bright side, but all I can see is these, negative, my family were terrible, my this happened, my that happened, whatever it might be. My boss just doesn't get me and keeps giving me more work. What sort of tips and tricks do you have for people that might feel like in everyday life they're stuck?
Possibly the most, and really one really can only speak from one's own experience. A couple of things that come to mind over 43 years of running a business, and a lot of it has been intensely difficult and had some really, catastrophic events in our business life over 43 years. You wouldn't expect otherwise. And when I look back at the bad events and how I reacted at the time, I can see very clearly now that I latched onto a story at the time and I held onto it as if it was a lifeline. But in actual fact, with the benefit of hindsight and being truthful and digging for the truth, because I got to a stage where I thought if I have to be able to accept whatever has come out of these experiences and not live with regret or anger or any of those destructive emotions. What did I need to do? And I came to the conclusion that I had to be remorseless in the pursuit of my own truth, which meant going back over some of this ground. It was very painful work. It's clarity. Clarity is never easy. You really have to dig hard. But it's in that digging that the beautiful, the powerful stories come forward. So I had to go and dig and look at the stories. And I discovered that, in fact, the stories that I'd been holding on to all those years were absolute rubbish. They were rubbish. They couldn't possibly have been the truth. And in letting those stories go and accepting my role and holding myself accountable as part of the problem or the issue or whatever it had erupted, there was so much healing in that. So I guess if I could give anybody a tip on that, it would be don't wait. Breast the beast. Grab it by the throat and have that courage to look it squarely in the face and say, is it really only that person's fault? Or was it only because they were this and they were that? Did I have a role in this? Look at the role that you played in it and the story around that. Because if you can get there quickly, you have years of not having to have regret and anger and pain. And, what's the point of that? It's just a waste of time. That was the one. Two others.
I had this fabulous spiritual teacher, and he used to say, in a much simpler way than I possibly could, he used to say things like, if it's going to be funny later, then it's funny now.
Yeah.
It used to really help to kind of get out of the story of, okay, this happens, or there's all these difficult bits around it, etc. If it's going to be funny later, then it's funny now. And I love how you're talking about don't wait. So
no, don't.
I'm sure many of the people that we both work with and our clients, it's like they come to a point, but they've waited 2-3 years to work through things. And I think if there was one gift I would like to leave with people, it's that once they start on that journey, they don't wait any longer to keep fixing up and working through the rest. It's like, now you've started. The first part is starting, the hardest part.
So I don't know if I've got time for the other two. I don't know whether I took too long.
Keep going.
One of the really helpful things that I've done in latter years to help me breast the beast, so to speak, or wrestle it to the ground, is given myself a word for the year. And I cannot tell you how extraordinary that experience is. It sounds so simple. I mean, you have to really do that work to determine what the word for the year is, because if you're going to follow this, it really does shape your year. But one of the years I chose the word acceptance. And that was the year in which I had to do this deep diving and looking at the story and the stories I was telling myself and replace them with the true stories to get to acceptance. So I think that is a very valuable tip. It's certainly over the 5 years or 6 years that I've been doing it, has led me on some really unexpected journeys with their own stories. But another interesting part about that is that the word itself starts to uncover stories that were there already that you might not have known about, that then become more important in your life and help shape your life. And I think the other one is truly valuing your value. I don't think people give themselves enough opportunity to sit down and reflect on what is unique about their value. And I use a tree to describe this. If you imagine a tree as all the roots are absolutely everything that's made you up until this point, to this very point in time, continues to, grow those roots and cement you into the ground. And the branches are your bodies of knowledge, and we have so many different bodies of knowledge. I mean, if you examined your life, and you're a mindset coach now, but there've been all the other things that you've learnt along your road that you have, extraordinary knowledge and expertise and experience in. And sometimes it's in the intersection of those bodies of knowledge that your real value comes. So it's in the intersection, for example, of my being a graphic designer and now a storyteller, because graphic design is about problem solving and listening to people and what they want. So in that intersection, I've learned so much. The sub branches are all your bodies of your insights that you gather because of your expertise and your knowledge. And insights are gold when it comes to telling stories. They're a fact in context, cause and consequence of that fact. When you wrap a story around that, that is absolute dynamite. And of course, the leaves are all the stories you can tell. So when you tell those stories, they nurture and feed and bring oxygen and life into the trunk, and the trunk holds your purpose. So the more you do it, obviously you have to have articulated your purpose first. That's quintessential to great storytelling. The more you do it, the more you solidify that trunk, the more you believe in your purpose, the more people will believe in your purpose. So in terms of a mindset shift, examining your value deeply, I think, is a wonderful tip, tool.
And it's a fabulous tip. And I think that more people are, with everything that's gone on through COVID and other things, even before COVID came along. I don't know about you, but I've seen this wonderful shift now where people are starting to look at more and more at their purpose. Companies are being asked to look at their purpose. You know, BHP blowing up the Aboriginal artefact, the mine up in West Australia. They might have done that before, but not really got any much feedback or pushback. But there was people that resigned over that now. So, you know, the society that we live in has shifted quite a lot, and being able to clearly articulate and demonstrate, not just articulate, but demonstrate what your purpose is, I think is really important. And I love how you've woven that so beautifully into valuing and understanding your value. I know with a lot of the work that we've been doing with clients over these last couple of years as well, around leadership wellness and that whole wellness and mental health space, because people don't know their value when we're in such a time of great transformation like this. I love that tree example you use. They don't necessarily understand that they've got those different bodies of knowledge and the stories on the leaves, etc. And so being able to help people uncover, I talk about it as, you know, a mountain of value is the way that I learnt to express it to people, and helping them to uncover that for themselves is you know, really important. And it's in that reframing of the stories. One of my inspirational teachers was John DeMartini, and he explains it in a way where for every challenge you have a benefit, but inversely, every benefit you have a challenge. So if you get too much support from your parents, for example, you don't learn to be independent. But if you're too independent from your parents, you don't learn how to rely on others and take support from others. So he has this wonderful way, and it's influenced my work a lot. Like that tree and that whole cycle, you know, there's always good and bad to everything, and it's looking for that balance with it. So reframing the stories so that you come into the acceptance of yourself and of other people in those stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Perhaps the most important part is weaving all those intersections together into one valuable offer, because that's what stops people dipping into multiple possibility disorder. And the moment they do that, their stories become disparate and scatter to the wind. You know, they're not focused, they're not directed where they can do the best work.
And interestingly, with that, one of the things that I've found with people, especially and not as much nowadays, but a few years ago when I started, I was saying, well, what's your purpose? And they were like, oh, I don't know, don't this, don't that. And I used to say to them, you know, well, just make one up, just pretend you've got one. What would it be? And it was a way of really trying to trick them through exactly what you're talking about. you know, oh, I'm this, but I'm that, but I did this, but I did that, but I enjoyed this, and you can get so noisy in your head because all of it is true. It's not that any of it's not who you are or not true, but you just have to pick a thread and then run with that thread. And then build a life around that. And that thread will change, like we've talked about. But those stories can, and you've put it so beautifully, those stories can help to reinforce that that's your purpose, that's your thread, that's your value and your gift to the planet.
Yep.
And what you do.
Absolutely.
Fabulous. And I know that we've talked a little bit, but how do you think people can reframe those stories? So if you've been told that you were lazy or useless through most of your younger life, or some sort of negative story like that, it can be hard for people to reframe as adults that they are not necessarily, because they've been programmed and that's their thinking. How do you think people can, what would be one of your key suggestions for reframing that?
Well, I think there's two answers to that, because if the person who was told that they were lazy for whatever reason, coming from somebody or a parent or a teacher or something that had their own agenda, I would be saying, try and get inside the head of the person that was telling you that you were lazy, and try and imagine why it was that they saw you were lazy, because that's their story, right? So if you can get inside their head and think, well, I can see why that person thought I was lazy, then that's a way for you to be able to distinguish that it's not something that you're carrying, it's something they're carrying. However, if you were lazy, and it could be seen that you were lazy, and you were in relentless pursuit of your own truth, well, then own the fact that you were lazy and own the story of your laziness at that point, but then have a look at whether you're lazy now. And if you're still lazy, say, well, okay, that's me. I'm just lazy. You know, I do other stuff. What's the other stuff? But maybe park the laziness. I mean, I know some lazy people. Perhaps the word should go. Laid back, it might be, or you know, they like to spend their time doing certain things that might be construed by others as lazy, but for them, it's how they nurture themselves or how they fill their cup, and then they go out and do amazing stuff in the world. So reframe the word. Actually, get really forensic about words. Words and stories are so powerful, and the word lazy has very negative connotations. And you hear a parent saying to somebody or a child, you're lazy, you know, stop being so lazy because they haven't picked up their clothes. But they're not really lazy. They don't pick up their clothes. They want to go outside and play. It's a whole different story. So I think looking at that word and what it actually meant in truth, and reframing the story around that, and then looking at what could be construed as laziness in your life today, and reframing the story around that. That's me nurturing myself. That's me giving myself the time I need to be able to go out and be the wonderful mother or father or partner that I am, or the artist that I am. You know, so many people say, you know, my parents said I was useless, I was this, I was hopeless, I never make anything of myself, and they carry that with them all their lives. But they're telling that story. They're not telling the story that they went on to build a mega empire, or they, you know, became a CEO, or that they married and had kids and they were all healthy and fabulous. You know, it's amazing the way we use those stories to suck the life force out of ourselves.
And we don't have time for the conversation around it now today, but I've also been interested in, you know, some of those negative stories have actually propelled people to be far more successful than they may have ever been, because they were trying to prove that person wrong.
Yeah.
And so when you're working with people like that and you're kind of unpacking it, well, you're unpacking also the drive and the energy they have to be the CEO or to be the number one.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting dynamic to, yes, be aware of where it's come from and unpack, well, that's not true because you're not a 10-year-old child anymore and you've achieved X, Y, and Z. But it's also interesting because underneath that layer is then recognizing, well, that experience or that story then propelled me to do X, Y, or Z. But I do love the points you were making around lazy as well, because it reminds me of when people are asking for book covers, and Sandy and I know lots of authors, and they're asking for feedback about the book covers and the difference between an opinion and an expert insight. Because so often people take on, you're lazy, or this, you're that, whether it's from parents or somebody in the world around you, and it's an opinion, because they don't know that, yes, you might be lazy at, picking up clothes, but, you're the team captain running around and organising everybody at the softball. So it's priorities. And like you rightly said, for kids, priorities are very different. And to keep that in mind when you're hearing or asking for feedback. And well, we could keep talking for many, many hours about all of this, but Sandy, how can people best get hold of you if they want to talk some more about their stories?
Oh, thank you. That's a lovely opportunity. Well, obviously, I'm fairly active in LinkedIn. I love telling stories in LinkedIn. And so one of the ways would be to connect with me in LinkedIn. And the other way would be through an organization called Moral Fairground, who I've partnered with, because we're trying to make storytelling accessible to people. So we've just devised a bunch of modules that are dip and dive, so that they're not, it's not very expensive, it's not very time consuming, but people can dip and dive, and I'm facilitating those. So that's another way of sort of being exposed to storytelling through me in a very easy, accessible way.
Oh, that's fabulous. And what a great gift, again, you're giving to everybody by letting people come in and dip and dive, like you said. And if there was one or two key bits of wisdom that you would share with your younger self, I know we talked about the relentless pursuit and starting it now, but what else might you say to that younger Sandy, the one that's doing the graphic design and possibly going down that pathway as a future? What would you say, or perhaps even earlier, to yourself?
I think I would be advising people to become two things. I think, first of all, to become much, much more aware of the power of the grumpy duo in their brain. I call them the grumpy duo. It's the one that spends their life saying, if only, which is the regret, so that, you're constantly in that space of having that dialogue with yourself and telling yourself the stories around, if only I'd done that, if only I'd not made that decision, so there's that, and that's just fueling regret. And the stories become so embedded, you can't, once you've told those stories to yourself over and over again, that becomes a reality. Unpicking that story and getting to the truth is much harder than not telling your story in the first place. So having that awareness. And the other is the what if, which is that future, what if this happens, the awfulizing. If I don't do this, what if that happens? So that you're caught in this vortex of regret and sort of fear. And I think that is actually your brain trying to keep you alive, to be honest. But the trouble is we've kind of evolved past it. And yet those two inform so much of our internal narrative. And if you can bring an awareness to that early on in the piece, the possibility is that you can exorcise the regret before it takes hold and becomes part and parcel of your persona, and you can help yourself with your fearful thoughts, because really it hasn't happened yet and it may never happen, and be more in the moment where some of the beautiful stories are actually happening to you on a daily basis. But if you're stuck between those two, you can't see those beautiful stories. So I think that would probably be my advice, because to myself, because along the way I would have tuned in my storytelling antennae for the stories that would serve, that the regret stories and the what if stories only serve if you are able to show that they weren't really as true as they were. You know, if you tell just a terrible, woeful story of this happened and that happened and blah, 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 you just sound like a victim. And if you tell a story about the fear you have about the future and blah, blah, you still sound like a victim. But if you can tell those stories and say that happened, but out of that, this came or that came. And I think that's having that very highly tuned story antennae.
And it's being empowered in what your brain is essentially telling yourself as a story, which is a really, really powerful tool to have, I think. And speaking of powerful tools, thank you so much for being on this episode and giving so many powerful tools to everybody watching today. Thank you very much, Sandy.
It's an absolute pleasure, Michele. Thank you for having me.
It's been amazing again, and thank you all, everybody that's watching today, and whenever you get to watch this, I hope that you've, like myself, taken away some real gems about how to create that mindset for success from the special guest, Sandy, today. And until next week, be great, be fabulous, and be you.